I'm incapable of staying quiet for a whole minute, so I won't try. Oh, hi everybody. Hi Jane. A few more coming in. Great. Okay, hi everybody. It's a huge pleasure for me to introduce you to Elaine Mitchener and welcome her to the Digital RNCM. Elaine's an experimental vocalist, movement artist and composer. His work encompasses improvisation, contemporary music theatre and performance art. That's straight off Elaine's website. I'm not sure that it really captures the full range, and it's telling that there is a prominent quote from The Wire that says this is an artist who is uncategorizable. I'm just going to pause for a second because my screen is stuck on Jane, which will be showing up on the stream. So I just wonder why that's the case. Is that the case for anyone else? No, that's fine then. I'm going to carry on. Sorry, Jane. I'll tell you what I'll do. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm just going to do that. I'm going to pin Elaine while I speak. She's worked around the world with prominent festivals and venues with some of the most important artists in experimental music. She include Apartment House, the London Sinfonietta, Evan Parker, John Butcher, Irvin Arditi, Christian Marclay, and many others. She has a production company called Elaine Michener Projects, where she's developed, produced, and toured and staged a wide range of projects, drawing on her numerous collaborators and foregrounding key social issues and championing composers and music underrepresented in contemporary performance. As an interpreter, if you just glance at the selected repertoire list on her website, you can see just how wide-ranging this is. From Affagis's Recitation and Sciarrino's Infinito Nero, which are hugely virtuosic, the graphic scores of Fred Frith and Christian Marclay, postmodern classics from Goebbels and Davis, and the unnotated, devised, and essentially improvised opera Star-Shaped Biscuit from David Toop. This is exemplified by, and we're so lucky to have Elaine today because she's come straight from a huge concert at the Wigmore Hall yesterday celebrating International Women's Day, which was 25 pieces, I think, from Fluxus text scores to really elaborate sort of longer form pieces. Elaine, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Was it really 25 pieces? I can't remember. I'm thinking about the brief description that I sent to you earlier about it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And it's a delight to be here speaking with everyone from RNCM. There's very distinguished names that I recognize in this Zoom chat. And so I feel that I need to be on my toes about what I say, but I'm so pleased that you've elected to join this discussion. I want to use the experience of last night because it's very fresh as a way to really talk about my approach to creating work, devising work, collaborating with people, and essentially having it presented. I must also make it not confession, but actually one of the things that has really helped me in doing what I do is that I spent quite a lot of my time before focusing solely on performance. I worked on the other side of the desk in arts management, so I'm very aware of the way that perhaps programmers or artistic directors or musical directors, producers, I'm aware of the way that they think or used to think. So I've not been doing that kind of work as a promoter of composers and young artists, which is I did in another life. I know things have changed and quite a lot since the time I stopped doing it. But basically, there are certain things that remain the same. And it is always a scary moment from the idea from the dream to researching and then pitching, getting everyone involved, the performance of it, and then also extending the life of the work. And the way that I work, because I work between improvisation, also notated music. I work in contemporary dance. I've trained with a dance company. In fact, next month I will be touring with a dance company. And they kick my ass doing that, because it's a very different approach to working than it is working with instrumentalists or with other singers. But I take all of those experiences and include them in the work that I do, or they help to inform the kind of work that I do. Last night, I presented a concert at the Wigmore Hall titled Women's Work, and it was based on the 1970s magazine. It was very short-lived. I think there were 2 issues, and it was created by Annie Lockwood and Alison Knowles. They are Fluxus artists and composers, and it lists the other female composers, Fluxus artists in this magazine. And it was created to kind of also address the imbalance and the inequality in terms of the representation of female presence in that movement, which, as you will know, the Fluxus movement was international. It was multicultural. It was racially mixed. It was also had a gender mix. But for some reason along the way, and I don't know how you all feel, and please feel free to put some questions in the chat or flag up a question, or if you want to say something. I don't remember when I was at music college some time ago. I don't remember knowing or being told about the presence of women Fluxus artists when we studied the Fluxus movement. I don't remember that. I don't remember being told that one of the founders of the Fluxus movement was an African-American double bassist. That would have been really helpful for me to know. It may have changed the direction that I was on when I was at music college. It would have helped, given me a lot of encouragement to know that there was some kind of representation of someone that looks like me who was involved in avant-garde music at that stage when it was of an interest to me. It would have helped me to know that there were women involved, deeply involved, and other people of color involved in that movement. So it's what I've done since in my own work. It's always kind of questioning this canon and using my work to question and to not necessarily always find the answers to these questions, but also to kind of address certain concerns of my own. They may not be concerns of other people, but it can be quite provocative in what I do. So that dream of being able to find a ways to realize the dream has to be there and the confidence needs to be there, but that doesn't come overnight. It does come with trial and error. It does come with I think the errors are the ways that you learn, and also to cut yourself some slack. So I've known Larry on and off for a while, and we met through someone else, and I consider Larry to be a genius composer and rather wonderful gentleman. And I've yet to perform your work, so we will talk about that another time, Larry. I don't know if I'm up for it. Actually, I don't know if I could do it because it's so fiendishly difficult and challenging, but beautiful at the same time. But for a long time, I considered composition as something that was more traditionally notated, and that was the only direction for me to go in. And it meant that I didn't put myself forward for as a composer, and I still find it hard to consider myself as a composer. Other people have insisted on giving me that title. So I think I'm more of a performer than a composer, but I guess as an improviser, I'm composing in the moment, and then moving on. So I guess I'm learning to own that description of myself, but then also I want to push it. And that's where I go back to the Fluxus movement, which those artists also knew about the canon. They were very well versed in it. They had the experience of it as composers, and they knew what it was they were disrupting. They knew it was a political act, and it's this idea of finding a new way of expression, and to meet people. I'm not going to give a history lesson on Fluxus, because you all know, but it's that thing of finding like-minded people that can encourage and push each other in a supportive way, to realize the things that are going on in your head. And I talk about the dream. It's one thing to dream, but then there's actually, you have to do something. You have to take it from the idea, the dream, to actively seeking a way to realize this dream, bringing it to life. So how do you do that? Well, there are lots of different ways. I talk to people. I talk to trusted, critical friends that I have. I have maybe one or two that I don't mind if they say, well, they just say what they think. I don't always agree with what they think, but I'm grateful for their honesty. So it's talking about the idea, or letting that thing mull around in your head, or think, well, what do I do about this? And when it came to women's work, I was told that, well, I was asked at the Wigmore asked me as an associate artist there whether I would be happy to do a concert in March the 8th. And I thought, all right, yeah, it sounds like a familiar date to me. Why? It's International Women's Day. And I thought, oh, right, okay, are you asking me because I happen to be a woman? And okay. And they said, well, yes, but we'd like you can do anything. So I thought I would use it as a way to not just present work by women composers or female identifying composers, but to use their works to talk about different aspects of life. So these works touch on, there's the universal things, universal themes that we can all identify with. And throughout that series, I chose works that talked about being othered, or there are pieces about feeling like the outsider, not feeling part of society, things changing over time. That's in the Jungi Papan piece, Noch zwei, where the text is by Rose Auslander, and Auslander is German for foreigner, and Jungi Papan is South Korean, who's spent a lot her adult life in Germany, and yet, although she speaks fluent German, she's still South Korean, and there's this otherness about her work that is very, I think, very beautiful and slightly unsettling. And I thought that could be very interesting, thinking about particularly now, in recent times, what has happened and what is happening in Ukraine, and what that has done to the Ukrainian people who are having to flee for their lives. That's a very current thing that's happened. But then we're reading about refugees and people having to make new lives for themselves in strange lands and feeling othered. And I thought that the way Papan has set Ross Auslander's text was so special, but it was a way for me to be able to communicate the ideas of feeling othered and not being part of a place. But when you're putting a program together or curating, I'm going to go back to the old fashioned thing of programming works. There needs to be a sense of continuity or a beginning, middle, and end, or a kind of a journey through, so that the audience is guided through the process. So they're not, whatever it is they experience as listeners, it's an active listening experience. Because I don't know about you all, but I like to be engaged with what I'm hearing in a concert situation, and an audience isn't it's not a group of passive people, and attending a concert is an active thing. And I personally like to kind of push that experience with the works that I present. So last night, the stage was preset, but nobody came on stage. But you could hear, if you were in the hall, it's different if you're watching it. I don't know what it was like on the live stream. They probably had a camera right up my nostril or something. I don't know. But I was right at the back of the hall and nobody could see me. So I was able to deliver the first piece, which was about a piece on grief and loss, dedicated to Luigi Nonno's widow. But the text, which is in ancient Korean, is actually written by a courtier expressing their devotion to the emperor in the 15th century. So it was a very interesting way that Papa has taken this text, which is a well-known text in South Korea. If you're studying and you have to, so I guess the equivalent would be Middle English or something, or learning to do some Chaucer or something in school here, and taking this text and then appropriating it for a different use, but so effectively, so it's something that we can universally empathize with, which is a deep grief and loss. But I wanted to play with this idea of a disembodied voice, and it's always been on my mind. So I thought with this concert, I can play with these ideas of expectations of what an audience expects to experience in a concert hall, and not rise to that expectation, but give them something quite different. I'm going to pause here because I don't know if anyone watched it or if anyone has any questions, because I'm much better at delivering my ideas and shaping things if I have a question. So I don't know if anyone wants to ask anything. It's Megan, who I know via Twitter, but not in real life. So really nice to meet you finally.
Hi, Elaine.
Hello, hi.
No idea how many times people say that to me. I was at the concert last night, and it was so wonderful. It was very interesting seeing Fluxus pieces being performed in a space like that. And I went so Jennifer Walsh had a piece played, and I spoke to her afterwards, and I said, it's so weird seeing like this kind of music performed in a place like this, and she just said, I'm used to it. Like, it does actually happen, but maybe not so much in this country. But you said something really interesting in the Q&A afterwards about how improvisation and experimental music like Fluxus kind of creates more of a level playing field. And do you feel like maybe that's why there are so many founding women or people of color in the Fluxus movement? And could you just like speak a bit more to how you think experimental music does that?
I think it allows that space. Thank you so much for coming last night. Thank you. I think it allows that space because there are fewer hierarchies in place. There is one comes to that music in a very honest way. You might come with training or you might come without, but it's your ideas and what you have to, your interests, what you have to share and bring to the table that is important. It's not where you studied or who you studied with. That's not important. So you can be 100% of yourself. And what was fascinating last night was that the ensemble, I mean, they're all so brilliant. They're individually, they're just virtuosos, and they have this wealth of knowledge and experience as well. But I then, yes, you have that. And I'm going to ask you to do something else, which was to sing, which they don't do. They don't sing. They're not singers, which is easy for me. It's hard for me to play shell chimes, which I had to do in the second. I mean, I was terrified because I'm not a percussionist. So I was like, you know, the amount of time, the amount of practice, it seems really easy what I was doing, but for me, it was hard. I don't get a chance to do that. But the thing is with experimental music, free improvisation, Fluxus works, it is calling, it's actually demanding or drawing out of you this a playfulness that sometimes I have to say is just you just don't get that in contemporary new music or classical repertoire pieces. There's something, it becomes very serious. Even if you're enjoying it, it's very serious. And it's just, I don't feel the sense of play or that people are relaxed into it. So I think that is something that I really need. I would want people to just be 100% in what they're doing, 100% of themselves, and not worried about a version that they've heard or the history of this particular work that anyone has played, you know, because, and also you're not judged in the same way. That's one of the main things. You are not judged when you're performing Fluxus works, experimental music, free improvisation. You're not critiqued in the way that you would if you were performing a repertoire piece. So a music critic will respond, I think, more to the experience of the happening itself, and in themselves they are opening up to that experience. They're listening in a different way, and that's somehow when we're performing repertoire pieces, it's, I don't know, there's something we're critiqued and judged in another way, and that really can stifle a performer. It's a very unhealthy place to be. And we can't all keep just performing premiering new works, you know. And for those composers out there, you know, we want more than the first performance. You know, you want the work to travel, but the job of the performer is to make that work sound as though it had just been written. And that gets harder and harder the more work is performed. You know, how many new approaches can there be? And I'm going to take shuffle for example, because before we opened up to this Zoom chat, I performed shuffle with a different group in a very different way. And initially I thought, oh, maybe that is the way to do it. But I thought, hang on, let me just look at Alison Knowles' text score again. And there's so much information in that. I mean, it seems very simple, just, you know, shuffle. But it's not just shuffle. It's not that it is, yes, you need to move from one place. And I use it as a device to get everyone on stage. But when we were doing it, the first time we did it, and we only had like yesterday afternoon in the space to do it. Our rehearsal spaces wouldn't allow us to try it out. I noticed the body language of the ensemble, and some people found it easier than others. And afterwards I said, do you know, I really enjoy the effort to shuffle. She has not said, Alison Knowles has not given an indication in the score, shuffle like X or shuffle like Y. It is really shuffle. You can do it as a group, or you can do it as an individual experience. So I then made a decision to say, this needs to be an individual experience. We know where we need to go. How you get there and how you shuffle is up to you. And that's a very liberating thing to have, to know, actually, I don't need to worry about how I look, because how I get there is how I get there. So it was a real surprise for me that one of the players was still shuffling when I got to the stage, and then had done a shuffle of her own. And because she didn't practice that, it was just in the moment. And that's what's so beautiful about it. She felt empowered enough to take it further. And I also, from a very practical point of view, I can see that they need to get to their places. They need to be ready for the next piece, as do I. But then I can take that shuffle around and do something else with it, because it's a piece of music. So it's this, you get that kind of, it's just that kind of instructional score, or this Fluxus piece, or experimental musical improvisation. You have this space to, it allows that space. There's that, the restrictions aren't there unless you add restrictions for yourself in order to present the piece in a way that you feel it needs to be presented. I don't know if that answered your question, Megan.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very big question. I do think it's interesting, as you're talking, I remember actually everyone interpreted shuffle kind of in the same way. And like the way that, like this, like kind of the speed at which they were moving their feet, yes, and how they were moving, and like how, and that wasn't something you practiced, that just non-verbally happened. So I wonder if, yeah, there are different.
No, that's interesting. Again, I think there was a practical, because we hadn't really practiced it a lot. It's actually very hard on the legs. It's very hard on the legs. It's hard to shuffle on carpet. Everyone's wearing different shoes, so there's the friction. There's so many things that you're thinking about, as well as, I need to get onto the stage and I need to fix my violin, or I need to fix my cello, and I need to do, and so one of the players is wearing a dress, and I thought, are you going to shuffle? Are you going to be all right getting off on the stage? It was all these different practical things. But I was really happy with physically, even though they shuffled in a similar way, the torsos were different, and the way they looked was different, and the way it manifested through their bodies was different. And that was interesting for me. I mean, I was thinking, when I was shuffling, I had a kind of rhythm in my head, particularly when I got onto the stage. And I was thinking of that at that point, but I wasn't when I was going along the aisle. Thank you.
It was great. For anybody who didn't see it last night, it was just fantastic, like the overlooking of rhythms of people shuffling around the carpet and then moving from the carpet to the woods, and then it was really resonant on the stage. It was fantastic. But I did just, yeah, no, and everyone was doing it constantly, and like if I was to do that piece, like I might interpret shuffling as being slightly less consistent, and I would have like started and stopped maybe a bit, and everyone was quite A to B consistent, although I couldn't see you at the back.
It's in, because when we tried it once, and one of the players couldn't shuffle, and they kept starting and stopping, and I said, look, if that happens, keep it in, don't fight it, don't try you might have to work your way into the shuffle, and then it starts like revving up an engine, or starts, the key ignition in the car, and it's just, I mean, they don't do it, the cars run by computers now or something, they start without even touching it these days. A button apparently, but the old cars you'd have to go, or you're cranking something up. And it's also, I'm thinking, what's Alison Knowles asked, what is it? It's disrupting the space, and it's changing the sounds of the space, because that's what you can hear as an audience member. The sound is being changed. There's all these different rhythms as well. So there's a lot of information for the ear, but it's also the act of moving. Does it dehumanize us, the way we're moving? Are we on a conveyor belt? What is it? What's in everyone's head as they're moving along? What is this? Is this how we are? Were we shuffling and shuffling until the pandemic put the brakes on everything? You know, there's all these different ways of approaching the work. And if you have time, you can just break it down and discuss these things and think, okay, which way works? Let's try it this way. Talk to people. How does it feel? Do you remember shuffling to get into the train station? Because people shuffle when when there's overcrowding at a train station and you cannot run anywhere. You have to shuffle, and you're shuffling with there's all these bodies shuffling to get on the tube. We shuffle all the time. Probably less so now because people are working on flexi time and some people are not going back to the office and blah, blah, blah. But it's that thing, if you're in a crowd, when you're going into a club and there's a line of people, you have to take your time and go in. And that's a kind of shuffle again. So it's about thinking about that and how that feels in the body. And that's why I found that piece particularly interesting. Well, I found them all really interesting, but also what is it saying politically or socially? What is Alison Knowles saying with that piece? Because she doesn't give that information, which is brilliant because it leaves us open to really think in a much more deeper way about it and why we're doing it.
Yeah, I think I'd love to know what she was thinking about most of her pieces. I'd love to know what the intention was. I think it's interesting that it says shuffle into the performance area. There is an insinuation there that something else is going to happen or has happened. But yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I could talk about that for hours.
Thank you. So continuing on from there, before Shuffle was a piece by an artist and musician and electronic music artist, Pamela Z, who is from California, and she's African American, and she doesn't record very often. I think she's had like one album out like 30 years ago, and then an album that came out last year. And Pop Titles, the score was a found score. It's actually, if you see the score, it's of the title of pop songs, which all start with You. And when Pamela Z performs it, she loops her voice and then reads the text. And when I contacted her, I said, I really love this piece. Can I perform it live? And I thought it would work really well in the space of the Wigmore Hall. And luckily enough, she said yes. She had performed it live with a dance company in the 90s. And she was very happy with it. So last night, the idea was as an element of surprise, to have the ensemble scattered in the hall. So they just looked like audience members and they hid their microphones until I indicated the polls for You. And I was very pleased with the response, because again, I don't know about like you guys, but I hate audience participation. So whenever something happens and someone waves a microphone and says, or come up on stage, that's like, I just shrink into my seat. Just please don't come near me. But if someone behaves quite strangely or starts to, it's like, what are they doing? Why are they because in the concert hall, we've all got to be quiet, right? Okay. It's out of respect and courtesy for the performers. So the last thing you want to hear is someone talking when everything is quiet. So I thought that for Pop Titles, it would work so well to have everyone scattered in the space, but also not just saying You, but to stand up and then look at different audience members, or appear to look at different audience members, because what I wanted was to make sure that we had everyone's attention right from the start of the concert. And there's an interesting tension in the air when you're not sure if you're being looked at, or someone's said, who else is going to stand up? Is the person next to me in the group, or are they an audience member? And I really liked that, the way that kind of disturbed the space before we entered the stage. So I had been thinking about this when I was programming the works. I chose the pieces that ask very interesting questions. The Pamela Z piece are pop titles, but they don't. I mean, it's kind of like, you stand out. You started laughing. You started something. You stole my money. You took everything but me. You thrill me. You get to me. You still got it. You move me. You want me. And but from hearing those titles, as the listener, you're able to create your own narrative or not, because it makes sense. You understand what's being said, but they're not connected, because they're just random pop titles, all starting with the word you. And I mean, I know how it feels for me to perform it, but I don't know what it felt like for the audience to hear it or to feel. Well, I do know, because some people spoke about it afterwards, but it was it's just a way of triggering that space and changing the space of the hall, because, well, as Jennifer says, she's used to seeing experimental pieces performed in venerable halls such as the Wigmore Hall, but not in the UK. It's not something that happens. We've got this weird notion of only certain music can be performed in certain places. So if this concert was presented at Cafe Oto, it would be just as strong, but the expectations, the people would expect it at the Cafe Oto, whereas you wouldn't expect it at the Wigmore Hall. And I'm challenging that by presenting these kinds of works, because I think the hall can take it. I don't know if anyone else has got a question. If anyone else watched it online, I'd be really interested to know if anyone experienced the work online, if they had any questions. I haven't got my gallery view on, so I don't know. No? Well, I'll continue.
I mean, I'm sorry, Elaine, I'm interrupting, but I'm really interested, having heard what you've said, knowing that you have Fluxus artists like Yoko Ono, who's talked about her work, her text scores from Grapefruit being a sort of springboard for a lot of her creative work subsequently, and taking that in radically different directions. And then also seeing very, very serious on YouTube when I'm lecturing in Fluxus, so that there are sort of scholarly historical performance practice specialists who specialize in Alison Knowles performance practice or Philip Corner performance practice. And it's really interesting hearing how you sort of navigate the territory somewhere in between, because this is definitely the shuffle performance that you might expect it. But at the same time, you've obviously thought about it in very different ways. You're bringing a lot of sort of, well, these scores insist that you bring a lot of creativity to it. I saw there was a question from Jane Ginsberg on the chat as well. I also wondered, because I know everyone would have watched it, I've got the stream of the concert, so if you want me to show any of that.
Oh my goodness, it felt, for me personally, it feels too soon to watch.
Of course.
But I know Jane's got a question. I just wanted to say actually, let's hear Jane's question and I'll come back with something to do with historical performance practice.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Jane. Oh, I can't. Is she on mute? I can't hear her.
We can't hear you, Jane, I'm afraid.
How about now?
Yes.
Right. I had the wrong, I've got a huge choice of microphones and I've got the wrong one. I've got the wrong one ticked.
Okay.
I just wondered, I'm looking forward very much to your concert in Sheffield on Friday night, because I will be there.
Great.
And I wondered if there is any overlap between last night's concert and Friday night's concert.
There is actually. There's well, the overlap. The main one is Jeannie Lee, who features in Friday night's concerts with two pieces. One called Blase, which is one of her poems, which she originally performed as a trio on an Archie Shepp album, but we're presenting it as a quintet, and a duo that she performed with Dave Holland originally, to a poem or text from Charles Mingus's autobiography. So that's because Jeannie Lee was also connected to the Fluxus movement, sound poetry in particular. So she had worked with Alison Knowles, she'd worked with Pauline Oliveros, she'd worked with Dick Higgins, she'd also worked with John Cage and Feltman. So for me, she's the kind of the bridge. She's that link, but she's primarily known as a jazz singer, and as an African American or as a Black avant-gardist, female avant-gardist. I think she was, for me, as just an iconoclast and also hugely, hugely inspirational for me. But I came across her within the realm of jazz. So it's important to me to include her in programs of contemporary music where I feel that it works from a programming point of view. And last night, Subway Couple, which comes from her album, Conspiracy, she's performed that as a solo voice piece. She's performed it as a duo with a cellist, and also in a group situation. And I love that level of flexibility. The text remains the same, but how you present it can change depending on the context. And so these crossovers really interest me. So as you'll hear on Friday night, I'm presenting Mingus's string quartet, number 1 for voice and string quartet. Now, I heard about this through Anton Lukashevich, who is the artistic director of Apartment House, and we talked about presenting this piece, performing it for years. I would say about 7 years. We talked about it and we tried to find the right context. And it wasn't until I was invited to do a concert at Wigmore during lockdown last April, which seems like a long time ago, but actually not that long ago, that I said, this is the right context. Let's bring Mingus to the Wigmore Hall. Let's see if the hall can handle his work. And I think it worked really well, because it sounds, Charles Mingus did not want to be considered as a jazz composer. He says, I'm a composer and I write music. And it's this thing of kind of just shaking up these ideas of what music is suitable for what space. That doesn't interest me. And I look for work that always challenges that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. I'm looking forward to it and looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yes, please come and say hello, please. I look forward to that. I wanted to just go back to, Larry, something that you said about performance practice and of Fluxus Works. And it's interesting that you'd mentioned that, and Yoko Ono and the performances of those works and how they changed. In December 2020, I was involved in a project that was a Sky Arts project. And it was a Marina Abramovich who did a takeover of Sky Arts for one night. It was like 12 hours of performance art, which is very ambitious. And I was very surprised to receive an invitation to participate, because I don't feel that there's much crossover between what Marina Abramovich does and what I do. So I was really intrigued. Nevertheless, I said yes. And then I was asked to kind of choose some works. And earlier that year, and in fact, the night of the first national lockdown, I was at Cafe Oto performing a live stream concert as part of their fundraising effort at that time. And in that performance, which was quite improvisatory, I had decided to do a version of Amazing Grace, which was kind of multi-tracked, which layered, and upon which I also improvise, and there's a movement aspect to it. So I offered Amazing Grace, and also Ben Patterson's piece from Methods and Processes, which requires the performer to light a candle and ring a bell, and as any number you run out, the piece stops when you've lit all the candles that you have. So I was able to do that at Cafe Oto. I tried to do that at the Whitechapel with real tea lights, but there was an issue of health and safety, which felt a bit strange to me. But Marina, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because Marina Abramovich is very interested in preserving these Fluxus works and performance art works. She believes it's really important that the legacy is maintained through different generations of performance artists or Fluxus artists to keep the works alive. And I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but I can see, I just thought, actually, why not? Why not? We do that with classical music, with classical works. They're there. There's a performance practice. There's the early music. There's a different approach to performing early music than there is to performing works of the classical period or romantic period. So why not with performance art? Or Fluxus music. So that was very interesting for me. And she really wanted the Ben Patterson piece to be, we filmed both the Ben Patterson and my own piece. And they decided with Amazing Grace. And I will find a link and share that in the chat for you. It's on my website under the projects page. There's a watch page. You can see a performance of it, and it's on Vimeo as well and YouTube. And I was happy to perform my own piece, but I would have loved to have them to have shared and shown the Ben Patterson, because it's a very strong work. And I think for a night of performance art, it would have been a really good thing to show and share. I'm pausing because I don't want to just rattle off and talk and not give people a chance to comment or to share. But if not, I will continue.
Yeah, well, yeah. I wonder what people are thinking. I was just really really interested when I started studying Fluxus music that the score, text score for Philip Corner's piano activities, is written in almost quite a tender way. Like you pull the piano apart, and it has a very particular sensibility. And I've only ever seen it done essentially with people smashing up a piano with big hammers. And then I saw a film that someone finally put online which is relatively recent, but it was Alison Knowles. It was all the original still surviving Fluxus members performing this piece, and I thought, I'll get to see how it's really done. And they smash up a piano with big cameras. Like, it's not the score. And so when there are some artists who have responded to that, and there's an artist at Huddersfield who has an instrument maker take a cello apart sort of piece by piece, it's very, very clearly connected to this Philip Corner piano activities. It's obviously resonant with that. But because it isn't, in a way, the score follows it more closely than the performance practice associated with it. And so she's turned that into her piece. It's a new piece, it's a cello piece. And it's totally different. So I'm really interested in how this work can sometimes be solidified into what it is by the way it's interpreted first, rather than by how it's written. And I know Abramovich like immortalized the Bruce Nauman body pressure piece on the same basis earlier on to keep that original sort of performance approach vibrant, I guess, as part of it. And yeah, that's all I was thinking about.
It's interesting because it's really hard when sometimes someone just gets a performance or the way they present it, it's really hard to not then think that is the only way it can be done. They've nailed it, they've understood it, they've really, they've studied with that person, or they've asked the right questions of that composer, artist, and they know what, that it's been sanctioned and it's been sealed. But I think as a performer, we really are tasked with trying to find another way. And I tend not to watch performances or listen to performances of things that particularly composed works that I'm then asked to perform, because I need to find my own way into it. I need to discover get the DNA of the work and find the landscape of it, find that structure, and then find a way of discover through that research and to discover the way that I can express and communicate the ideas that are on the page, to elevate it, to bring it to life. And one of the works that was performed last night, another one of the works by Michener Roberts, and I don't know if you're aware of their work, but Michener was commissioned to write a piece for me. It was one of 5 pieces that was presented for Donna Eschinger Music Targa in October 2020. I'm going to leave that there because it was right in the height of lockdown, and we actually had to record the performance without an audience. So last night was very special because Gasping for Air, Considering Your Purpose, Dissolving is a text score paying homage to Ben Patterson, which was very clear to me in the way that they wrote the instructions. And it was dedicated to African-American men who had died at the hands of the police. Michener Roberts is an African-American musician, visual artist, and composer. And when I received the score, the following day, George Floyd died at the hands of the police. So the timing of receiving that work, and then the actuality of what was going on, because what Michener what the score is examining is this feeling of heightened tension and how things can change in a moment, and the responses to it, and also trying to meditate. And it's an exercise in deep listening. So it also connected to the Pauline Oliveros piece, which was presented towards the end of the concert last night. But they ask us to prepare ourselves before we even start examining the score through internal memory recalls as almost a meditation, so that it's something that we can switch on and helps us to really understand what they are wanting us to do in this piece. And there are very specific instructions about breathing at certain lengths of time, remembering words that they might that you might hear, expressing that word through texture or through tone, listening as an ensemble, listening outwardly to the room, the sounds of the room, and then responding to those sounds. So it requires very high highly skilled high improvisatory skills. And it's an exhausting piece to do because there's so much memory work going on, but there's so much internalizing that you need to do in order to be able to do everything else. And it was interesting. It was very interesting to present it to an actual audience in the space, because I was unsure how much they would be able to focus and concentrate, whether the tension would be too much or not enough tension. But judging by the responses that I received and heard afterwards, it was incredibly engaging and very powerful. And we don't seem to be doing a lot. We're standing and looking out. So one of the instructions is like, you're standing, looking at a cloudless sky. There's someone next to you. You're curious. You don't feel threatened, but you're curious. Or you're staring out, looking into a condemned space. You do feel threatened, or you are not, the person next to you don't want them there. But you have to imagine this feeling and really feel it in order to be able to express musically the next part of that score. So it's an incredible experience. It is very exhausting, and I was very interested. I felt it's a very effective use of a text score in that way. They weren't asking us, Matten is not asking us to be actors. They're asking us to be truthful and truthful in the way that we communicate, and honest and direct. And it's another musical approach. And it's a rather unusual one, because it's not about showing off virtuosity at all. It's a rather humbling experience. I'm looking forward to presenting it again. It can last 12 minutes. It can last half an hour, depending on who you've got who you're playing the piece with. And also it wasn't quiet enough, but there's like at 60 BPM, there's kind of a metronome sound or a ticking clock sound that you hear. So that also adds to this level of tension that things could kick off at any time, which is actually a reality for many people of color, many African Americans in the States right now. It could all change in a moment. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or any other questions. I keep saying that. It's just I'm mindful of time as well, and I'm probably not. I don't know if I'm actually saying everything that I said in this kind of brief description, but I think I am, because in order to prepare for these kind of pieces and the research that's required, there's a lot of personal work that needs to be done, and there's the music, and you look at it, but then when we get together, I mean, there's contextualizing everything, and it's really going into places, parts of you that you wouldn't necessarily use to express and to communicate, and tapping into those aspects. That's really important to me when I'm presenting work. And for last night, it was tapping on climate change. There were two pieces that talked about climate change. There's pieces and one that talks about climate change and the effect of that, and refugees. That was in Hannah Kendall's piece, which is inspired by a painting by Basquiat, part of his Tuxedo series. And she took bits of newspaper headlines that were on the paintings themselves, and she wrote this piece for me. And Tansy Davies' piece, which is quite different, which is drawn from the opera Cave that I was in, and she reworked the lullaby, which is a duo between myself as a kind of shamanic female presence to a man who has lost his daughter, who was a climate change activist. And it's kind of an apocalyptic experience. And also for him, one where he is transformed through the search for his daughter. And Tansy managed to evoke this very kind of dark, murky, but beautiful kind of sound world, quite different to how it was in the opera, the actual opera, and which I thought was highly effective. And Hannah's piece, working with harmonicas and music boxes at the same time, and each of the music, I mean, there are 6 different music boxes, 6 different pieces of music, and then cutting through that with these newspaper headlines about refugees and creating problems and tensions and the changing in the environment that's having an effect on the crops. It was so effective, but done in very original ways, I felt. And it was this kind of, it was in line with what I wanted the concert to do, which was to use women's voices through music to talk about aspects of life that's affecting all of us. So there's a universality about it as well. I didn't think there was one piece that someone said, well, that's not, I have never thought about that, or that's not touched me. I think it was all very relevant. That's just my humble opinion.
Can I ask, Elaine, how you approach working with performers who maybe don't have a lot of experience with text scores, as I'm sure you might have had to do in the past, particularly ones that are quite conceptual, performance art based?
Yes, it does depend. That's a good question. It does depend on the level of experience of the performers. I've tried this, I tried out with students actually, because students at college, at music college, they know a lot, they do know a lot, but they may not have the experience as performers. But one needs to just kind of break it down. So I try to gain the trust first through improvisation and then verbally giving instructions. So it kind of paves the way for something that's a bit more conceptual. But I don't think it works to just kind of dunk people straight in, because, you know, that's not very nice, and we're kind of floundering around trying to find an answer. But it also, one has to have a lot of patience, and even with experienced musicians, experienced contemporary new music players, they may not get a Fluxus conceptual score. It's just do that, you know. And that's, I think, is what those pieces require from us is to kind of let go what we understand about making music, and to come to it with a very open mind. So you have to have an openness and be honest that actually you don't know. 1, you don't know. 2, you're afraid because it's out of your comfort zone. And 3, you're afraid because it's out of your comfort zone. And then 4, okay, I'll give it a go. And it's all right if it doesn't work, because there's no wrong when you're trying to work and understand these things. You have to allow this process to reveal itself in the right time. And I will say, with Michener's score, I bust a gut over that. I mean, we all did. And I was so stressed over it. I mean, even yesterday, I mean, we didn't have a lot of time on it. And they're all very experienced performers and have done conceptual text-based scores. But it was kind of, there was an anxiety there, because it's like, do we have time to memorize this? Are we going to do it? It's like, don't worry if you don't get it right. It's about the intention. It's about the focus. It's having that is really important. And I heard from a singing friend before the concert who said they were coming that night, and And there were a couple of singers in the audience. There's quite a few singers in the audience last night. And I was like, I'm like, it's not going to get the notes right. And a friend said, getting the notes right is so overrated. And I was very grateful for that comment. She didn't say don't get the notes right, but getting the notes right in themselves, it's so overrated, because you have to communicate and convey and express. And that's really important. You can't sacrifice that for getting the notes right. Getting the notes right in themselves is just like a really boring thing. And I would say even with a conceptual score, just doing what it says that's like the beginning, the bread and butter. But then you need to take it to the next level and apply it to life, I think, to make the kind of really wrestle with it, to make so that you can gather some kind of meaning for it, so that you can really express what's going on, even if it's something that seems silly, like blowing up a balloon. Well, there are tons of different, 100 ways of blowing up a balloon. Examine them, test them out, see which one feels right. How are you feeling today? Should you use some device to help you blow it up? What happens if it pops? What kind of shape of balloon? What color balloon? What kind of balloon? There's so many questions. Don't just take the first one. And I think when you're working with people who are not so used to doing that, for them to know that there are a myriad of approaches that can be applied to understanding these scores, it's really helpful. It takes the pressure off and it allows the joy to come in the discovery. I can see a hand from Jane again.
Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Good. It was really just a quick one, because what you said reminded me that in a former life, I was a singer who specialized in contemporary music that was contemporary at the time. And I remember taking a work called My Sister's Song, one of those very few pieces for unaccompanied soprano, to the composer David Lumsdaine, the Australian composer, the great Australian composer David Lumsdaine. And it was at a time when he was very much influenced by Zen Buddhism. And I apologized for not getting all of the notes right. There were a lot of what looked like toothbrushes.
Oh, it's gone.
That I'm actually singing the right notes. And he said to me in this beautifully calm voice, and I'm not going to attempt the Australian accent, just remember, Jane, there are no such things as wrong notes, just different notes. And I think it was that was very nice, and it was very reassuring, and I gave the performance. And I reminded him of this when I saw him, I think probably at his 80th birthday gathering. We were actually just earlier this year at his 90th birthday concert at the Royal Academy. But I reminded him of this at his 80th. And he said, I don't believe I ever said such a thing, but I'm very glad it was helpful to you. And so it was, for the next, 20 years that I went on singing.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's important for composers to reassure the players of their music. It's just whatever it is that helps to take the pressure off, because particularly, that something is really challenging, it's really hard it's not every singer, not every player can just do it straight off. They're great sight readers, or if you're a singer that has perfect pitch, then that's like a real gift for being able to quickly scan something and sing it back. But that's not making music, that's quickly scanning something and singing it back, or that's quickly playing something and playing it. The music making is the kind of really getting into the nub of that and understanding what it is you're trying to convey and communicate. And that takes time, and you have to give it time. You have to give it time to get into the body, to become part of you, and then it can be expressed. And sometimes it doesn't happen until you've actually performed the work. And then it's the second time you come to perform it, you get a chance to perform it a second time. It's like, I know what it is. I know what this is now. With the Jungi Palpan pieces, I asked her if, because the way she's written it, the colours that she, because it, for both pieces, one is in German, one is in Old Korean, the colours that she conjures up, this, I'm singing quarter tones, which is not something that I've ever done before. And so it was a real challenge for me. But she evokes, I mean, the timbre, the sound of my voice, it's kind of alludes to this kind of pansori type of expression. And I asked her, do you want pansori sing? Because I can't do that. I love it, but I can't do it. And she said, think it, but don't sing it in that way. Think it, but don't sing it in that way. And so it's more about this kind of declamatory, particularly for the first piece, just a storytelling kind of approach, which was really helpful. It kind of unlocked. It also it helped me to relax more into the work. She said, I want you to sing with your voice, your art voice. You know, don't try and sound like a pansori singer, because you never will be able to anyway. That's a lifetime of study and doing. It's so specialized, and I love it. But it was a really helpful key and clue into that world, sound world that she'd conjured up. And so, yes, composers can be very helpful by reassuring them, those who are performing their works. I said, well, yeah, it's fine. I just want you to capture the essence of this. You know, yes, the notes are important. They are important. We want, we don't want kind of there or thereabouts, but what we want is we want the sound world that you're hearing, that the composer is hearing in the head. And that's what you're aiming for as well. And that's the intention. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for anyone in the room? I'm just scanning up and down the list. Everyone's keeping really quiet. I mean, yes. perhaps before we finish, because I'm also keeping an eye on time, but we do have a little bit of time. You've spoken about the concert yesterday. It's such a privilege to hear about it, sort of when it's so fresh in your mind and your body. I was also wondering about, because that's saying it's a traditionally curated concert is obviously not quite representative of what it is, and you've made that really clear from what you've spoken about. But there's also projects that you've put on which are very different kind of collaborative enterprises, but they're quite unusual. So I was looking at your project with George Lewis and David Toop. So working with two composers coming from very, very different places. This is obviously something you're overseeing in a kind of production role, or perhaps in a kind of cinematic auteur kind of role. This is your vision. And I was wondering if you talk briefly about what it is to curate a project like that as distinct from a concert like the one last night. Or perhaps they're the same. I don't know.
Well, the kind of bossing people about's the same. So bossing. Working with David Toop has always been interesting. I'm a huge admirer of his work. He's been hugely supportive of my own. And we met when I was performing in a concert in King's Place in, I think it was 2009. And David isn't a conventional composer. He's known as a music journalist primarily, and he's a writer. But he creates these, what we nicknamed as Toopscapes. So he creates these electronic sound pieces. It works with computer music, but he's also a very he's works in improvisation, in free improvisation. So for me, it felt very natural to work on a project with him, which involved film. I spent some time in Venice, about 12 years ago, for 3 months on a residency, and I was asked to present a piece, and I invited David to create an opera kind of a solo voice opera with film. He has a friend that was filming things, and it was based on the diaries of Leonardo da Vinci. So David basically put this text, drawing on Leonardo da Vinci's, thank you, Megan, drawing on Leonardo da Vinci's diaries and creating a libretto from which I improvised the vocal line, and he had created a soundscape. I then employed the expertise of a friend, Dan Van Huynh, who's a Vietnamese American choreographer and dancer. So I was very interested in movement and the way movement changes what the voice can do, and combining these, and together, Dharma and I have developed a kind of method of working together where we really exploit movement and the voice. And of Leonardo was a test piece for us, was the first piece in which we were able to try these ideas out. And we were then commissioned to finish the work and present it at Ultima. And it was David, in the spirit of free improv, which is kind of you do what you do and then you move on. He said, I've created the piece, you interpret it how you want, which is so generous, which is quite unusual, because it's not, composers tend to be quite, and I know wherever I speak, quite controlling at times about, I want it to be done this way. So he was a bit surprised when he saw what we did with it, which the film grows over the duration of 50 minutes, but it starts like a dot, because what we realized is that it doesn't start with his electronic soundscape. It starts with 5 minutes solo movement that was choreographed with just voice. And then you hear the sound, and then you start to see the film it's like a dot on the screen, and it just slowly grows over 50 minutes to the climax of the piece. And of course, when David first saw it, he thought something was wrong with the film. He thought we didn't want to use his music, but it kind of changed the energy of the work. And that's what I like about collaboration, bringing in other people from other disciplines, but just to have who might have a different viewpoint who will have a different viewpoint to mine, or will see it from a different angle and help to elevate works. And I really enjoy working in a collaborative way, and have done that for a number of the projects. You mentioned with George Lewis. George Lewis and David were then brought together for Industrializing Intimacy. The text for that, the title for that came from a symposium, not a symposium, it was kind of a gathering of people, industry people, and someone from Sony or there's a big record companies was referring to their pop star that's on their books and their social media accounts, and said, we are in the business of industrializing intimacy, so that a child who thinks that they're engaging directly with you, Larry, because you're one of the star pop artists for X commercial music industry organization, that child is actually not engaging with you, but with the 50th minion that's working on your social media account. And I thought that was deeply sinister, this whole thing of industrializing intimacy, which we all know about now. And so I didn't know George personally. I knew who he was. I knew what he did. I saw his name that's on a Music of Today program, which was then programmed by Julian Anderson. And George, I thought, oh, I'm going to write to him. And I kind of Googled, thank goodness for Google. And I saw that he was at Columbia. And I just emailed him and said, I've got a commission from Sound and Music. This is what I do. This is who I've performed with. Would you write something for me? It needs to be 15 minutes long. And I didn't expect him to respond. And he said, yeah, sure. In fact, I'm going to be in London for the premiere of my piece. Will you be around? And so that's how we met. And he created a wonderful piece for voice and electronics. And it had movement in it, again choreographed by my long-term collaborator, Dam Van Huynh, in which I used this text which talks about memory and it's really about, it's a memory piece. But I used part of the text as on paper. We decided that I would eat the paper. I would stuff bits of paper into my clothes, but I would also eat this paper. It wasn't actual A4, white A4 paper. It was edible paper, which is quite hard to eat and sing with, to be honest. But it's kind of ingesting these memories in other ways. So it's not just a thought, but it's actually a physical process, because it acts as serves, I guess it serves as like a Proust Madeleine kind of thing. So it's that memory of this person or this experience or this sound or this place. And it actually, the George really loved what we did with it. And we worked again together in Donna Eschinger for the piece that he wrote for me and Ensemble Manufacture für Aktuelle Musik, which is a Berlin-based ensemble. And this time it was set in text by the feminist writer and cultural theorist Sylvia Wynter. And that piece was really hard to perform. It was notated. The first piece that George wrote for me was also notated, but this one for Donna Eschinger was really virtuosic. And I was nervous about performing it. He also said, take an approach that is more free and more jazz and with a bit of kind of pansori. And I thought, okay, how do I do that? But actually, it's more about a thought process rather than that's how it needs to sound. And by opening up that aspect for me, it really helped me to learn the piece. And he's also, I said, look, this is right on the passaggio. This is like, I hate this note. He says, well, sing it down an octave. It's fine. Or sing another note next to it. It's fine. And that also just gave me that flexibility and freedom, because George is known as, he's a fantastic, phenomenal trombonist and also improviser, but he's a huge intellect, but he's also very open. So it's that kind of having that energy really helps. If composers, if we could just have that more, that really will help with the performances of our works. If we're so rigid, all it does, these restrictions make for a very unhappy learning experience and performative experience for the artists. There are other ways. There are more positive, relaxed and encouraging ways.
Positive, relaxed and encouraging sounds like a very good place to draw things to a close. Lesson for all the composers in the room and watching elsewhere online. Elaine, thank you so much for your generosity in coming in what is clearly something of a busy week. And
it's a pleasure. Thank
talking
you
so candidly and openly about your work and your process and these amazing projects and concerts. Good luck on Friday in Sheffield. And yeah, I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say thank you so much for today.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's been great to share just a bit of what I do. And thank you to everyone for their time this afternoon. Thank you, Larry. Good to see you again.
Yeah.